James's cat, Mr. Minky, had been missing for 3 whole days when it finally returned one morning with the strange white collar around its neck, and the cat was seemingly not willing to let James touch it under any circumstances. But when James finally got the chance to see what was inside the collar, he did not hesitate a second and called the police. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It was not easy to get the strange white collar on the cat's neck, but his curiosity about what it was much greater than the cat's desire to keep the object. From inspecting the outside, he couldn't determine what he was dealing with. He had to break it up. There was seemingly no way to open it up cleanly, and if there was, he took a hammer from the garage and smashed the white collar into 1,000,000 pieces, finally revealing what had been in there all along. James could barely believe his eyes. Who was responsible for this? He only knew one thing for sure now. The police needs to get involved in this quickly. James had his cat named Mr. Minky now for at least 3 years, and the animal had always been an outdoor cat. If he was kept inside the house for a whole day, the cat was meowing and was doing damage all over the place. So James preferred to let his cat outside the house, so Mr. Minky was able to play and enjoy the sun. Also, James trusted Mr. Minky because he always returned to the house, especially around dinner time. But one day, the cat didn't show up in time at all. James spent all the evening waiting nervously for his beloved cat, but Mr. Minky didn't show up at all. He didn't know what to do and how to react. He was worried that maybe something really bad happened to Mr. that night. James couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, the cat was not still returned to his home, so James decided to take action. The first idea that came up to his mind was to call the local shelters to ask if they had picked up his cat and to explain to them what exactly the cat looks like in the case that they come across Mr. Minky. The second thing that he did was that he made some posters and he started putting those up around the neighborhood. The next 2 days passed with no sight of Mr. Minky, and James started to really get worried that something terrible had happened to the cat. Luckily, this would not be the case for James, as Mr. Minky would return to him as soon as possible. It was an early morning, the day that James woke up to the sound of loud meowing coming from downstairs. He shot out of the bed and did not even get dressed before checking. James' heart was beating faster than ever before, and when he got to the kitchen, he nearly collapsed on his knees, crying out of pure joy and excitement. It was his cat, Mr. Minky. He couldn't believe it in his own eyes. It was like a dream finally came true. James started hugging Mr. Minky. Suddenly, he felt something hard that he had not yet seen through the curtains of his tears. When James looked a little closer to his cat, he observed something strange. Around Mr. Minky's neck was some sort of a collar with a big white thing. When James tried to put off the collar from Mr. Minky, the cat made it obvious that he did not agree with this at all. The very moment that James felt that his cat tried to hurt him, he was shocked so much that he unconsciously let the cat fall down. James had so many questions about the strange white plastic thing that was around Minky's neck. James had no idea what he was going to do from now on, and he was really worried about himself and his cat. James didn't lose his courage. James thought and thought. James found a sleeping pill that wouldn't hurt the cat and bought a bottle to keep Mr. Minky snoring away. But when he tried to feed it to the cat, Mr. Minky refused to eat it. James decided to mix the pill in with some food to see if he could trick the cat. Finally, Mr. Minky ate the food and went back to sleep. James snuck over and started checking out the device. As he got closer, he thought he noticed something new. When he watched again, a red light flashed. Suddenly, James was even more disturbed by what the device could mean. Instead of feeling curious, he was almost nervous about being around the device without knowing what it could do. What if it was something dangerous? James decided that he had a right to know what was stuck to Mr. Minky's collar. It didn't matter if he destroyed the device because it didn't belong to him, right? James grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen and cut the collar. James picked up the collar and turned it around and around. When he held it up to the light, he noticed a small button that hadn't been obvious before. As soon as he pushed the button, James heard the device beep in response. A computerized voice stated that it was starting some kind of upload. After a minute, it said, "Upload complete." James had never connected the device to the internet, so he had no idea how it was uploading anything. What kind of data was on the collar? Finally, James decided to stop playing by the rules. He didn't want to waste any more time being confused and thinking in circles. He quickly headed back to his toolbox and grabbed a hammer. James set the device down on the table and smashed it with the hammer until the casing pulled apart. When he bent down and started sorting through the mess, he could finally get a clear view of what was inside. The first thing James noticed was the camera, which he was expecting to find already, but he definitely didn't suspect that the device had a microphone or an antenna to send data on its own. He wanted to tell someone, but who would believe him if he called with such a strange story? Finally, James realized that he couldn't be expected to manage something so unusual by himself. Without knowing who else might help, he called the police and told them that he might be in danger. After James finished explaining what was going on, the police officer promised to send someone immediately. In just a few minutes, the police were at James's house with the lights and sirens running. It was obvious that they were taking him seriously. He wondered whether this was all part of some bigger plot. Before long, the police were standing at his front door and ready to help. Once they were inside, the police explained that several people had called about the white collars, but every time they tried to investigate, the collars vanished before the police could arrive. Maybe the person who'd put them there was continuing to watch the cats in case they had to get the collars back. James was completely shocked that others were going through the same thing, but the news actually made him feel better. James immediately showed the collar to the police, hoping that they'd be able to figure out who was behind it all. The police confiscated the collar and took it as evidence. They said they would get back in touch if they had any other information or needed more details from him about what had happened. James tried to relax after they left, but he couldn't stop wondering about the strange collar. But before he could get too far into his show, the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number and was almost too afraid to answer. But his curiosity won out, and he hesitantly picked up the phone. It was the police station calling him with an update. They'd analyzed the device and traced as much of the information as they could. They were able to track down the person who'd made the device and figure out what his motive was for making the collars. The truth was unbelievable. It turned out that a local teenager was creating tracking devices and testing them on cats he found in the neighborhood. He had no idea that he was scaring people when the cats came home with unusual collars. The teenager had simply wanted to make sure they worked since he wanted to start his own business one day.